Welcoming us this afternoon is Tristan Cox, a Rutgers GSE graduate. Dr. Tristan Cox has been working in education since graduating from the GSE in 2010. During his time as a graduate student at the GSE, Dr. Cox had the opportunity to work as a member of the Urban Teaching Fellows. The program was created to recreate, mentor, and train teachers who wish to work specifically in urban education. Since receiving his first master's degree in social studies education from Rutgers GSE, he's gone on to obtain a second master's degree from Seton Hall and then his doctorate of education from Seton Hall. He graduated with that in May of 2020. Congratulations, Dr. Cox. He is currently a high school social studies teacher at Plainfield High School with aspirations of teaching full-time at the collegiate level. He spends his days mentoring students and assisting them with their post-secondary school plans. So help me welcome Dr. Tristan Cox.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to welcome you guys to this conference. As stated before, I graduated the GSE in 2010. So that, puts me at about 10 years in the classroom. I've loved, I've had some good days. I've had not so great days, but I've loved my experience as an African American male teacher, excuse me. One of the first things I realized when I began teaching was that there was a lack of African American male teachers, and that my role, wasn't just to teach history. It was about representation, and showing my students that, a familiar face, and showing them someone that looks like them, and that, you can reach these levels of success in society. So, I started out, and one of my goals right away was, how can I build up my students? So teaching history wasn't really, wasn't my primary goal. That was what I am contracted to do and employed to do. But really it was, I was there to build up my students that are diverse. So one of the things that I've done that I'm proud of is I created an equestrian club where the students, Black and brown students, are able to be exposed and given opportunities to ride horses at Watchung Stables, which is a few minutes away from Plainfield, and work on social emotional learning with my students, and creating an after school program called Be Free, in which, students come, to me on Wednesdays. I feed them, and it's really just an opportunity and a safe space for students to express themselves and, talk about the issues that they're facing, as teenagers and high school students. So, I think my role as an African American male teacher is really important because there's not that many of us, and I'm proud of that. And it's the reason why I've committed myself to 10 years in the classroom. So, guys, I hope that today is fruitful for you. I hope that you get something out of this conference and that you leave with some ideas that you can wrestle with, that is going to help you guys grow professionally.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cox. It's so important to hear from leaders like you. Moving forward this afternoon, Tanisha Davis, who is the New Jersey Department of Education Director of the Office of Recruitment, Preparation, and Induction, will update us on the department's teacher workforce initiative. Welcome, Tanisha.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? I see you. And I am sharing my screen. Can we see the PowerPoint? Okay, perfect. So again, thank you, Nora, for the introduction. Want to thank our co-sponsors in this work, Rutgers University, as well as NJACTE. Very grateful to the committee for putting the convening together. Thank you all for your hard work and for making the convening possible. And thank you to our chair, Stacy Leftwich, as well, just for leading the charge. As folks are pulling this together, it's just exciting to work with people that are committed to the work, and just continuing to push forward, to work together in this. So just want to ground us in our rationale for even digging into this work. And I know many of you already know what the national data and research says about diversifying our teacher pipeline, but just want to make sure that we are just refocusing on that, understanding that our student population is becoming exponentially more diverse. And there is a lot of research and data that show the importance of a diverse teacher workforce for all students. So from outcomes, positive outcomes academically for students, as well as even the idea of students of color that show interest in attending college as a result of having a teacher of color. And then also the importance of a diverse teacher workforce for all students, understanding that our students are being prepared for a global society, and ensuring that all of our students have access to and exposure to people that look like them, as well as those that do not look like them. Which for us gives us an opportunity to debunk some stereotypes and ensure that students are prepared for this global society. So that said, I want to dig into some New Jersey data specifically, and a large percentage of our teachers are white. Our data is reflective of the national data. We see similar trends in New Jersey as we see across the country. That said, for us, the bright spot is our new and novice teacher workforce. So our teachers in years 0 to 2 are slightly more diverse than the overall teacher workforce. But we also notice that there is a slight decrease in that number when we look at 0 to 3, just with the understanding that we are losing teachers of color in years 3 through 5. So even in doing this work, thinking through and determining not only how we increase our recruitment as far as diversity is concerned, but also thinking about retention and ensuring that we are retaining teachers of color that enter the pipeline as well. Some more data, just taking a look at our overall, looking at the school level data. So we have almost 2,500 schools in the state of New Jersey and 1.4 million students. And in those 2,500 schools, we don't have any schools that are 100% white student population. Our student population is extremely diverse. And then when we look at our teacher workforce, we have 417 schools that do not employ any teachers of color at all. And for us, this is alarming considering the large number of students that will not see teachers of color in their classrooms or in their schools. Again, not giving our students of color exposure to teachers that look like them, but then also not giving our white students exposure to teachers that do not look like them. And the last piece of data here looks at our administrative teams across the state. So almost 2/3 of our administrative teams are 100% white. So again, that being a concern for what we want our students to see, as well as the compelling research about what it means for student outcomes for all students, our students of color, as well as our white students. This slide wants to just take a little look at the composition and the pathways. We know that we have 2 pathways into the classroom, our traditional route as well as our alternate route pathways. And we notice that almost half of our teachers kind of go through each of these 2 pathways. But when we look at the demographics and this kind of is reflective again of national data, that we see a larger percentage of our teachers of color coming through that alternate route pathway. And though we know that there are various reasons why individuals select different pathways, it is important to recognize and think through as we're doing this work, how we are drawing teachers of color into the profession, and then also understanding that variation and rationale for folks selecting whichever pathway makes the most sense. But wanted to make sure that we are aware of this data as we're thinking through our work and engaging in the work. So as a State Department, we remain committed to this work. And even in spite of the pandemic and a lot of shifts and changes and unpredictability just in general, we have remained committed to this work, understanding that our mission is to ensure equitable access to high quality education for all students, and have intentionally thought about our definition for a high quality teacher workforce to ensure that we are encompassing racial diversity even when we have those conversations and dig into this work. And as we looked at the makeup of our newly certified teachers, we're talking about 4,000 new teachers entering the classroom annually. So this provides us with an opportunity in the recruitment, preparation, and retention space to make sure that we are making a systemic impact. That said, just taking a look at the pipeline, we understand that each point in this pipeline is a place where we potentially could be losing teachers of color, either entering the profession or being retained in the profession. And that just further confirms the importance of this work being a shared effort, that we can't do it alone at the State Department, that we have to work with various stakeholders and organizations and school districts and even our prep programs and high school programs and so forth to ensure that we are not just filling the pipeline, but shoring up and securing all those places where we could potentially be losing individuals of color at some point in this pipeline. So just want to reiterate our goal, that by 2025, the goal is to ensure that our new and novice teacher workforce is reflective of the race and ethnicity of our very diverse student population in the state. And with this being such a lofty goal for us, our theory of action involves engaging stakeholders from, again, various points in that pipeline, but then, of course, various points just in the educational community to ensure that we are recruiting, preparing, and retaining our teachers of color, making sure that we are integrating culturally responsive pedagogy at each point, to ensure that regardless of race, our students have access to a diverse teacher workforce that is also culturally responsive. So just taking a look at a year in review, the work that we've done, and we generally update at the convening annually. Excited to be at the third annual convening to even talk through the work that we were able to accomplish, even in light of a pandemic, and understanding that this work continued to go on, and appreciated the commitment of everyone helping to move it forward. So over the course of this year, the partnership was developed between the department's Career Readiness Office and Rowan University Preparation Academies, with an opportunity to have these academies approved as career and technical education programs. And again, with the launch of that, excited to see what the future brings for creating this pipeline of educators going, or students going from high school, hopefully into educator preparation. We've also made some updates to our website to ensure that we are highlighting this initiative on our website and really creating a place to host resources for folks that want to learn more, want to engage, and want to be able to implement some of the promising practices. Our Diversifying the Teacher Pipeline grant projects wrapped up this year. Those were projects conducted by Rutgers University, as well as Montclair State University. Again, those reports were submitted hoping to learn from those projects and be able to share best practices, figure out how we scale even and support some of the promising practices that come out of those grant projects. And many of you know or are aware that the fiscal year 21 budget also included some funds to look at diversity as well. So $750,000 in the upcoming, or the newly adopted budget. So what we are hoping to accomplish in the next year and the next several months, taking a look at the Diversifying the Teacher Pipeline grant outcomes and making sure that we are publishing a report so that we can spotlight those promising practices, trends that we notice, lessons learned, as well as being able to share resources to the field for folks that want to engage in this work and want to build on what was already started. Also, with the fiscal year 21 grant funds, want to be able to, will be releasing a grant opportunity and issuing those grant funds for the fiscal year. Also plan to publish some resources for districts. We often hear that folks are interested in increasing teacher diversity and want to engage in this work, but really want some ideas for what are some promising practices. How do we fund some of the programs that we like to start? How do we fund and support teachers and so forth, and grow your own programs, and some of the other promising practices that districts could engage in, those partnerships and so forth. So want to be able to provide those resources publicly and share with districts. And then also want to engage stakeholders to really pledge a commitment, understanding that this work doesn't happen just at the department. I always talk about the partnerships that exist among us and our prep programs and other organizations that are engaged in this work, and hoping to continue to expand that so that we can all be committed to the same goal and ensure that we're each doing our part in the work that is necessary to move the needle and to really accomplish our end goal. So I have our email address that will directly go to folks working on this initiative within the department. Want to leave that up for a moment so that folks can just email questions so that we can respond and follow up with folks. Feel free to follow us on social media. And again, thank you all for this opportunity. Thank you for your time. And again, thank you to the committee for really doing a great job with this. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Nora.
Thank you, Tanisha. Your presentation really emphasizes the need for this convening. We need to diversify this teaching workforce in New Jersey and of course around the entire country. But really that was powerful data. And as we move forward, we have some panelists and some leaders who will talk with us about the work that they do in this area. So to introduce our moderator and our panelists is our own Dr. Jennifer Robinson, who's been on the planning committee. Dr. Robinson is from Montclair State University. So take it away.
Thanks, Nora. Good afternoon, everybody. And welcome again to our last week of our convening. One of the highest rated sessions from last year's convening was the Voices from the Field panel discussion among current and former teacher candidates of color. And this year's panel will again share their perspectives and experiences before, during, and after their teacher preparation, as well as views of why we need to have teachers of color in our schools. Our first panelist this afternoon, I'll ask each panelist to just give a little wave when I introduce you. Our first panelist is Jacob Brown, a senior at Rowan University, where he is studying to become a health and physical education teacher. Jacob Jake is also a scholar in Rowan University's Project Impact, which stands for Increasing Male Practitioners and Classroom Teachers. Project Impact increases the representation of males from racially and ethnically diverse backgrounds in teaching and responds to persistent opportunity gaps faced by young men of color. Mr. Brown is a high-achieving student who has demonstrated a commitment to academic excellence and community engagement. Our second panelist is Charlene Lawd, who has been working in education since graduating from Rutgers University in 2013. During her time as a Rutgers undergraduate student, she had the opportunity to serve as a first-year interest group seminar instructor, which inspired her to consider pursuing the teaching profession. After serving as an elementary school teacher, Ms. Lawd earned her master's degree in education and transitioned to working in higher education to help others achieve their goal of becoming a teacher. Presently, she is back at Rutgers as a GSE doctoral student with a concentration in education, culture, and society, and she is a senior program coordinator at the Center for Effective School Practices. Ms. Lawd spends her days helping aspiring education professionals, including career changers and recent college graduates, become licensed teachers in New Jersey. Third panelist, Rosianne L'Esperance-Gass, is a proud graduate of the Newark Montclair Urban Teacher Residency. Having obtained her New Jersey certification in science in 2011, she's been teaching at Eastside High School in Newark ever since. A well-respected leader among her colleagues, Rosie teaches 9th through 12th grade biology, pre-AP biology, AP biology, and AP psychology. She's been a cooperating teacher for both of her alma maters, Montclair State University and Rutgers University. She leads new teacher induction workshops and serves as an adjunct professor at Montclair State. Rosie is currently pursuing her doctorate in cognitive studies in education at Columbia University. Our fourth panelist is George Stevenson. For over 8 years, William Patterson University alum George Stevenson has worked at balancing his many passions, teaching, creating art, and designing digital media. He's currently a technology teacher at Garfield Middle School in Garfield, New Jersey, where he shares his love for web development with his web design students and his love of storytelling with his multimedia journalism students. Mr. Stevenson started his teaching career as a commercial art teacher, teaching graphic design and art principles in illustration and painting. While he's not teaching, Mr. Stevenson freelances as a graphic designer and front-end web developer, combining his passions for art and technology. Last but not least, we are particularly honored to welcome back our dynamic and engaging Week 1 keynote speaker, Dr. Eddie Fergus. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Dr. Fergus is Associate Professor of Urban Education and Policy at Temple University. A former high school teacher, program evaluator, and community school program director, Dr. Fergus's recent research focuses on Black and Latino males' academic and social engagement outcomes, disproportionality in special education and suspensions, and school climate conditions. He has a distinguished roster of publications, including articles, book chapters, evaluation reports, as well as 5 books. An upcoming co-edited volume, Boyhood and Masculinity Construction in the United States, will be released by Routledge very soon. Dr. Fergus is no stranger to schools, having worked with over 75 districts on educational equity and school change since 2004. And he is a natural for this session, and we're delighted he agreed to return as our moderator this afternoon. We're going to hear from our panelists for about an hour and have about 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. And we suggest and ask that if you have any questions, use the chat feature to raise questions or comments for the panelists, and we'll be monitoring the chat for your questions. So now I'm happy to turn things over to Dr. Eddie Fergus.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Robinson. It's so good to see you. Where's Stacy? Stacy somewhere on here. Okay, there we go. Dr. Lepton, thank you for this idea that we talked about over the summer. Nora, for your great work in really pushing this forward. And I also want to, where's Tanisha? There's Tanisha. This whole grid thing is driving me insane. And Tanisha, I really appreciate you kind of providing a temperature check of where we are now, right? And as New Jersey, as we enter this conversation, because I think there is a complexity that we are needing to do, right? Like there's no silver bullet in this work. right? And part of that silver bullet, I want to contextualize or add to the contextualization before I kind of sort of pose the first set of questions to our panelists, is that we're endeavoring into something that, as within education, when we started doing this work of ensuring that we have integrated schools, we went the route of not having teachers of color, right? Between 1954 and 1964, of the 82,000 Black teachers that were existing, 38,000 were fired, right? Because there was a sort of a perpetual sort of understanding that no, we not only we're struggling with the idea of integrating schools, and we pushed back on that as a country and said, but we're not going to integrate our teaching force, right? And so now we are many decades forward, and we are finally putting a stake in the ground and saying unapologetically, we need to and must diversify our teacher workforce. And everything that has transpired since the mid 60s to now have worked in ways that have been tensions for us to diversify that workforce. So this conversation that we're having here today, and that which New Jersey is putting, laying tracks to try to do, is to really try to rectify decades of work that has been occurring that has minimized our potential of really diversifying our workforce for the, not just the goal of for what our kids get to see, particularly kids of color, but also what our white colleagues get to see, what our white students get to see, right? This is an opportunity for us to actually hold up the civil rights activist mantra that we know that that for several of us, there have been folks who have been in our families who have worked really hard to make sure that we continuously are ensuring civil rights happen. This is our opportunity to do this work. And so that's why I'm excited for us to get to talk about how do we keep doing this? What are the other complications? So what I'm going to ask the panelists to do, and we're going to go in the order in which you all were introduced. And there's basically two big buckets of questions I want to ask. The first one is going to be around you all sharing, why you got into education, right? Because part of what I want us to make sure that we center is that there is a strong desire that's existing among all of our practitioners that brings them into education, right? And in particular, I want our colleagues here, our panelists, to share sort of their own personal stories around what's bringing them into the field, right? Because that's something that I want to see. What are the ways in which we can utilize that to carry forward throughout their trajectory? So let's start with Jake. Jake, tell us about what's bringing you into the field, because you're knocking on the door, about to finish, right? And anxious to kind of get into the classroom, right? So tell us what brought you into it.
Well, first of all, I want to say hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. It's great to be here. What originally brought me into education, and we kind of spoke on this in our little pre-meeting, was it wasn't my first choice of a career I wanted to pursue, but it was definitely in the back of my mind when looking through careers. But when I actually did get accepted into the College of Education at Rowan, what brought me to actually stick with education was actually being able to teach. I've always felt I've had a good skill of public speaking. I feel like I can convey knowledge well. And I remember my sophomore or junior year when I first stepped into a classroom to observe and teach like a little blurb on a lesson. I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the interaction, fell in love being able to actually teach and feel like I'm passing a part of myself into somebody else. And then if they can benefit from that, it's just, I've always heard it from a million other seminars and educators. Was true. I feel like if at some point in my life, if I teach 100,000 kids and I change the life of at least one kid, then being an educator was worth it in the long run for me. Okay, I was told that my internet connection's spotty. Is it better now?
Much better. Yes, I was about to give you the awkward Zoom pause. Like,
just
hey,
quick rundown on. Yeah, and I got done talking and nobody was saying anything. I was like, oh, did I say something wrong? No, but just long story short of what I just said was when I first started actually teaching or being able to step into a classroom for observations, actually being able to teach even just a small introduction lesson or being able to actually feel like I broke off a piece of knowledge and shared it to somebody, I just fell in love with that from the day I did it. And I've heard it from a million other, seminars and videos and other educators, but I feel like, say I teach 100,000 plus kids throughout my career of being an educator, if I can change the life of at least one student, then being an educator was more than worth it in the long run for me. And that's what's really keeping me in and drawing me into being an educator, just being able to feel like I can help others and give them opportunities that maybe I didn't get, that I felt like I deserved, but didn't have the access to.
Great. Thank you so much, Jake, for sharing that. Charlene, tell us, what was your why? What brought you into the field?
I mentioned it a little bit in my bio, but at Rutgers, I taught a first-year interest group seminar on diversity topics. And so I did that course because I just thought that it was really important that other people learned about diversity. Because in my freshman dorm, I met someone who was like, oh yeah, this is my first time going to school with Black people. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And I said, I wonder how much that's applicable to the rest of the Rutgers population, because Rutgers is so diverse that kind of surprised me. And so that brought me down the path of teaching a FIGS course because that's taught to first-year students. So I said, let me try to shape these minds, right? And at that point, I was just a junior in college. And as senior year was approaching, someone had mentioned if I had heard of this organization called Teach for America, which helps train a teaching corps and sends them to different parts of the country. So it was really that moment when a couple of people had identified something in me that would make me a great teacher. When at that point, I was just doing things because I enjoyed helping people, like Jake said. I like hearing the sound of my own voice. I like people, being in a group. So that's what got me into that space. But when a couple of people started saying the same things to me, I said, hey, maybe it is true what they see in me, and maybe I should check this out. So long story short, I went to an info session. I really enjoyed it and have stayed in education since then. But it was really people seeing something in me that I hadn't even considered as a career option. I'm sure I'll get to talk about this a little bit later, but as a child of immigrants, a conversation about being a teacher really wasn't on the table when I was exploring my career paths. So I'm glad that people thought to say something to me and really highlight some skills that they identified.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Roseanne, tell us about what brought you into the field.
Well, originally in college, I went to Rutgers in New Brunswick, and I was a pre-dental student. I enjoyed tutoring a lot, but I never thought I would eventually become a teacher. It wasn't until I was at UMDNJ, which is now Rutgers Medical School, and they had a flyer for like a scientist in the classroom, and I just volunteered. And I came into the classroom and I fell in love with it. And I just fell in love with that whole experience. But going back a little bit and talking about what kind of drives my passion, even though it wasn't my initial career choice, is that I remember being in my first chemistry class at Rutgers. And the professor saying, oh, we're gonna skip the first 3 chapters because you probably learned this already, and you more than likely learned this already in high school. And I remember thinking, like looking around the room and saying, well, I didn't learn this, and just having kind of like this big like wake up call that, even though we are all students at Rutgers University and probably most of us are from New Jersey or, from the United States, that we don't all have the same education. And I remember that feeling, and it's still a feeling that carries me and affects me today. And I remember thinking, like, if I have the opportunity, I don't want anyone else to ever feel like this.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. We're going to come back. I got some questions around that. George, tell us, what brought you into the field?
Well, good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Get my days confused. So what brought me in the teaching field was, one, I had a natural love of knowledge, a love of learning. And I didn't really get to realize that until I reached high school. I went to Rosa Parks High School in Paterson, New Jersey, and I had phenomenal teachers there that inspired me. Two teachers that inspired me, or three teachers that inspired me. One was my own commercial art teacher, Mark Cannon, who I just felt knew more than my regular subject teachers. And him being an art teacher, he just knew everything. He knew anatomy, or he knew structures of a ship, and he was just an abundance of knowledge. So he taught me to love to learn. And I had another teacher, Michael Olo, who inspired me to be more active, to live out loud in a sense. And he was a small Italian man, around 5 feet, and myself, you probably can't tell from the camera, I'm 6'7". So this gentleman, he's a powerhouse, and he's looking up at me, and he's a teacher. He's looking at me, he's like, George, you got to go get it. What you want, you got to go get it. And we would do things like play basketball, and he's posting me up in basketball, and it's just the height difference. But he just inspired me to be a teacher and bring that energy. And I had a teacher, Miss Yvonne Nambe, who taught me compassion and taught me empathy. And that's just those three factors I feel make a great teacher. And I try to embody that. And, just having that in high school, and, me being around my peers and wanting to teach them and inform them, and me just having the idea of, I wanted to continue that legacy from those three teachers, and hopefully, reach someone that was at my level or at a point that I was when I was developing as an adult, and to inspire them, if it's to be a teacher or to be a doctor, a dentist, right? Just as long as I move their needle from where they are to a little higher, I think that would be great accomplishment for me.
Thank you, George. So the next set of questions I want to ask about, and for you all, and I think you already started hinting at, is, so what are the set of experiences that you've been having both personally and professionally that keep you in, but also the things that challenge you to stay in, right? Because one of the things that I appreciate Tanisha showing the figure of the pipeline is, we can get folks into different parts of it, but one of the toughest parts is that first entry, those first 3 to 4 years, and then that retention piece. How folks that particularly teachers of color stay in the field and stay really committed. And I'd love to hear from you all, because you're all kind of, I hear you all dropping some cookie crumbs of some of those experiences, right? So Roseanne's point around sort of walking into chemistry class and the educational gap from your K-12 lingered into your college experience, right? And what impact that has in terms of who we get in, who was able to stay in the field, right? Because the educational gap of our K-12 actually lingers into much longer. And also Charlene's point around the what it means to go to college in a context where you're the first that is of somebody, of a cultural group that somebody is seeing, and sort of what that does in terms of you're trying to pay attention to, like, I'm just here to go to school. Now I gotta be sort of this cross-cultural sort of entity, right? So I'm sure you all have had both personal and professional experiences that keep you in, but also the sets that challenge you staying in. And I'd love for you all to kind of share some of those set of experiences and how you make sense of it. So, so I want to sort of, we can start with going ordering again, but feel free to kind of sort of feed off each other. So Jake, why don't you start off first and kind of sharing with us, what have been some of the experiences you've had so far that keep you sort of connected to and wanting to strongly be in education, and or those things that you find you're kind of being challenged by?
So first, can everybody still hear me good?
Yep.
So good. All right, cool. I would have to say the biggest things that keep me in education is Project Impact. Kind of a little self plug in there, but no, honestly, my Project Impact at Rowan, I always say it's a network. I try to shy away from saying program or scholarship, because there's the monetary benefit, but Project Impact it's way more than that. It's family at this point. And with my mentor, Mr. George Guy, principal at Rosa Middle School in Cherry Hill, he's been my mentor since my freshman year, and he's given me more guidance than most people in my own family. Now it's really that I've seen that education has turned more into, even with the people in my own program or my own major, we have, multiple group chats where we all collaborate and talk. It's just, I've come to see that education is more than just a career path, but if you have the right people around you, it's really just, it turns into a lifestyle. It turns into a really deep rooted, family thing. And I would consider a lot of the people around me from education that I've met through the education program in my school more as family than just friends or peers. So that's a big thing that keeps me in, just the pure fact of, I feel like I don't have to go through it alone.
I agree.
The last point, Jay. Yeah, go ahead, Rosie-Ann.
It's the same situation with me. I've been 10 years in, and I definitely think that the community that's built based on my participation in the Montclair Urban Teacher Program, the Montclair Urban Teacher Program, and the community of educators that I have at my school, because we are a cohort and there's multiple cohorts at one school, and we even within the district, and how we remain to kind of like, we continue to engage with one another and problem solve and reflect and just improve our craft. And me being 10 years in, sometimes like, I definitely think having the younger or the more novice teachers kind of join this community keeps me on my toes and keeps me remembering why I'm doing this, and and having me refocus on, away from all the other things that are interfering with the reason why I became an educator, which I think sometimes is hard for a teacher to do, which is kind of like, refocus your attention. And so I definitely think that community plays a big role. I think that I've mentored a lot of teachers, for my school, for my district. And I think that a lot of the issues happens even if I am a mentor for them, I can't just be the only person that they are in contact with. There has to be a community of individuals that they have to feel supported. And I think that sometimes after either teacher education programs, I don't know, not my teacher education program, but maybe certain teacher education programs, they're kind of left on their own. And it's a shock. And so it's kind of like a sink or swim situation. And if they don't have someone with a lifeboat or a group of people with lifeboats surrounding them, they're going to sink. It might take 2 years, but they'll sink.
Yeah, I'll share something that Jake said that I wrote down was education is a lifestyle. And I think that statement both resonates to me as a challenge of staying in the profession, but then also why I want to stay in the profession. There's this idea, I do agree that education is a lifestyle. At the same time, there's a deprofessionalism that comes with that sentiment. When people are like, oh, you're a teacher, you're just supposed to be tired. You're a teacher, you're supposed to have no time. Well, is that true? Does it have to be that way just because that's how we're portrayed essentially? But I will share an example of someone who keeps me in the profession is my sister has been a teacher now, a tenured teacher. And when I started teaching, I would be like, how does she bring home just a purse, right? Just her phone. And I'm like, I have all these stacks of things and I have a rolly cart and I have a backpack. But that comes with a professionalism. Over time, she has honed in on her craft and she can really execute lessons because she has spent time in the profession developing what she has. So we still tease her about that today, but now I see, now that I've been in the field a little bit longer, that that's an aspect of professionalism and experience and really being passionate about what you do. You don't have to take home the backpack and the cart, but it's okay if you do for a year or two while you're getting acclimated, right? There's no shame in that, but it's all about that longevity and that pipeline.
And for me, it's kind of what everyone else touched upon, especially with teaching being a lifestyle and the idea of community or the sense of having community in the teaching field. And also for me, it's being able to reach those students that are considered the trouble students. And those most times are those students of color. And you connect with the teachers, with the students, the trouble students, when the administration and other teachers send those students that they feel they can't deal with, really, in a sense, to your classroom to after you need to, calm them down, or you need to find some ways to communicate with them. And I had experience with the fifth grade, and the whole school had an idea about this fifth grade. And, this fifth grade was terrible. This fifth grade was, they did this, they did that. They pushed down a substitute teacher, and, substitute teacher ended up going to the hospital. And then, people walk past my classroom with the same fifth grade. Everyone's just, this when I was an art teacher, students are painting on task. They're walking up out of their seat to get more paint, and it's an expectation I gave them. And, it's also art class. I do take that into account. It's a special class. Kids really do tend to take to the specials. But it's also having an idea of expectations, and, not letting what happened yesterday follow them into the next day, and trying to get them to know, I still have a chance to be a better person, a better student. I don't need to let what happened, what made me act out of character yesterday follow me today. So I build this reputation that just lingers on me. And, I try to sanitize the kids when you come in. So you had an issue at lunch, you and Jonathan had an issue at lunch. Okay, when you walk through the store is a barrier, right? It's going to wipe all of that clean. So when you get in my classroom, you and Jonathan, you don't have to talk to each other, but you're not going to carry on what went on previously. And, the kids were receptive to that. They knew that. And I would have students come to my classroom to calm their nerves. I've had students huffing and puffing. They come to my class, sit down, do a project. You can do some mindful coloring. And then they leave, they go to where they need to go, administration's office or back to class. And, I think just being able to still reach students, and, I'm worried about that one day where, I feel like I can't reach students, But I think so far, as long as my heart's in it and I focus on that, I think that'll keep me in the game in teaching.
Right. Thank you. This is good stuff. And so I'm curious about one element that I think I'm hearing you all sort of touch on, and I'm sure our audience is interested in hearing, because, we are thinking about sort of what it means to diversify this workforce, right? And what is, how is it that we begin to understand the set of experiences that teachers of color are having? And so I'd love to kind of hear you all talk about, the sets of experiences, the good, bad, and different, that, that color also, that live as part of sort of how you're being these teachers, right? Like I think about the first year of teaching. I remember the principal who hired me said to me, "You're the first Black teacher we've had in 20 years." And on one level I appreciated that, but then what came with after that was the Black kids all of a sudden started getting trickled into my classroom informally as like, "Oh, can you hold this kid in your classroom?" And I realized, oh, wait a second, I'm supposed to take on this disciplinarian role or this cultural broker in this school setting. Like I didn't sign my contract did not say cultural broker, on it, but yet there was this quiet sort of way in which you're expected to take this on. And I'm curious to hear sort of how you all have, as teachers who are, I hear your passion around what you love and doing, but also this dynamic that you're also, you're also sort of individuals who are part of sort of communities of color who are also perceived in those particular ways, and folks reading that, and how that sort of has, for lack of a better term, colored the set of experiences you've had in the field. Yeah. So whoever would like to kind of jump in first. This is like double dutch now, okay? Roseanne, go ahead.
Well, what happens, I don't know if that happens at every other school, but I know sometimes with, at my particular school, with time comes kind of like, I was given, when I first started teaching, I was given kind of general ed students. I had a great mix of culturally and linguistically diverse students. And then as I became more seasoned and respected, I was given AP courses and all of that. And even though I had the most experience, I was given those AP courses, which tend to have, less kind of issues in the classroom. And so that happened because I was a seasoned teacher and respected, but at the same time, I was still given a class of students who were, had behavioral and emotional issues. And so I had to kind of have like that dual role. Like, we understand that, you're seasoned and you are teaching these AP classes, but you're still and I mean, it wasn't said, but to me, it was implied. It was still like, but you're probably the only one that can kind of get to these kids because you're like the Black chick. That's how, and so I embraced that. I mean, I'm not saying that's for everyone. I embraced it because I felt like I could kind of be a moderator between these students, but it did add another kind of daily, and it was not a burden. I don't want to say it was a burden, but it was an extra kind of layer that I felt that I had to constantly represent these students and be responsible for them. And so it added another stressor to my job. And it's crazy because I definitely think that it's not always talked about, and it makes people feel uncomfortable, but I think we need to talk about it. I think people need to get uncomfortable in order for things to happen. And so I definitely think that having these students, I was kind of like the last resort. If they don't do well in your class, then they can't be here. And they got trickled out. And so you have these two kind of, I have these two kind of, like, I feel like identities at my school, where it's just like, you're respected, you're this teacher, but you still have to represent for kids who are culturally and linguistically diverse that we don't want to deal with.
Thank you. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. Others, George, Charlene, Jake, how are you seeing things going? So go ahead, George.
I'll jump in. So that is the experience too. You kind of have to code switch among students. You have this one form of you that you talk to your staff members. And then with the students of color, sometimes it's like they expect you just to code switch, or you might feel you have to code switch and just say, I want to level with you because I don't want you to. You have that heart-to-heart moment with that student, and you try to break it down to them. You're going down a path that I don't want you to go down, because I can see that path before you can. I can see the horizon of that before you can, and I want better for you. And it's something that you wish you didn't have to do. You wish that everything would run smoothly. But I go through those moments with some of my students because I know in the school I was at previously, I know the certain ideas of certain staff members. And I'm the special teacher, so I would see everyone anyway. But then I'll start to notice, we're going on a field trip. We paired you with the 7th grade teacher just because you deal with the 7th grade very well. You just have a great way with the children, and that's code for we have more males of color in this class, and we just want you to stay with them just because we think you're going to be able to watch them and mediate and monitor them. And then there was an incident that happened during our sort of the initiation of distance learning, where we had a young male of color, also special needs student. He didn't turn in his assignment, and the mother reached out to his special ed teacher and said that he wasn't able to work on his assignment because what was happening with George Floyd affected him. So he wasn't able to hand that assignment. And we're in a staff call, and that teacher just goes on, what an excuse, that this child couldn't work because of, the news coverage of George Floyd. And I had to jump in there. Well, I don't feel like being on this call right now because I'm also not in the right state of mind. I'm also feeling drained of my energy being here and then listening to you, say these things. I can identify with what he's gone through. And then that kind of just like put a halt to everything. I guess one, they weren't expecting me just to jump out there. They expect just to have those ideas and statements. But, that was an uncomfortable moment. And those type of uncomfortable moments do have to happen for people to either decide to, well, let's understand each other, which hopefully that's the best case scenario, or, we'll learn our boundaries, which, that doesn't do anything but divide or separate ourselves. But we should always, as educators, be on a road to understanding. as educators, we're lifelong learners. You know, if we put a wall up against things that just feel uncomfortable, then we're not really being a lifelong learner. We're learning to a point, and we're halting either our development or our students' development. So, you know, and just having that experience, I actually ended up, because of there were other things that happened during that, I went in transition and moved on, and now I am a computer teacher at my other school. I feel bad for the students because I know that sort of is lingering in there in that school, and you know, that's some of the things that happen too. You want to be there for the students. You want to make sure that you are the opportunity that they can have, because some of the teachers can't identify with students of color. Some teachers can't identify with students of color, and you know, that's why we need teachers of color to be able to identify. You know, to be able to, when a student shares an experience with them, right, they don't just feel like they're just casting their self into the wind and they're getting blown away. They want someone to catch that and understand that, and you know, being able to talk to students about certain things that happen. It could be culturally, you know, and students feeling receptive. And I myself try to be a teacher who understands all different students of all different backgrounds. You know, so that's learning about my students who follow Islam faith or Judaism or any other aspect of a student's life. And I try to make sure I be a person who's as open-minded as I can be for students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that, George. Charlene, Jake, what resonates for you all in this conversation?
Yeah, kind of to like piggyback off of what Mr. George Stevenson said. In our most recent meeting for the Project Impact program, we spoke upon like when an educator of color comes into a workforce and they're kind of put as a disciplinarian role. Now, me personally, I haven't had to experience something like that, so I can't speak too much on it, but I just wanted to bring it up and bring that to light because when we were talking about that, you know, a lot of the other mentors and people in our program said that all the male colors and some of the male people of color, some of the females of color, you know, had to experience being a disciplinarian role or being, you know, kind of like the token teacher that had to deal with the students of color just for that reason alone. And one other thing is where you don't want to be put in that position, it's also important for yourself and, you know, your other, I guess, peers and employers to recognize that there are some situations and some things that only another person of color will be able to understand, whether it has to do with, you know, culture, you know, doing your hair a certain way, or things that we're seeing in, you know, commonplace media today. It's just important to recognize that it's a very strange and fine line with blur lines of not being a disciplinarian, but also recognizing that you are that person to these students. That was really it.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly share one of the things that stood out to me after hearing other people speak was George's experience speaking up during that staff meeting. And I will say one of the ways that, you know, my racial identity has colored my teaching experience is just sometimes how people expect you to respond or not respond to something based on how or what they perceive you to be, right? So like I'm a Filipino American, but I taught in a school that was predominantly Hispanic. So people would assume that I was a Spanish speaker, and sometimes we'll just make comments about the other people. So the other would be the non-Spanish speakers. And I'd have to say, you know, unfortunately, I actually don't speak Spanish, but this is why, right? So then they'd be like, well, why don't you speak Spanish? And then there's that layer of like inner judging. And then I'd say, actually, I don't speak Spanish because I'm not Hispanic, but I'm trying because I work in this community. But that's just kind of how it has colored my teaching experience. It's just how people expect you or not expect you to respond, and then how they interact with you or the comments they make around you, or in this case, myself, because they assume I'm part of one demographic or the other.
I so appreciate you all kind of providing your own points, your own set of personal and professional stories around how as you're entering the field, as you're in the field, that it's also you're having to exist within an ecology that in of itself is also struggling with making sense of not just, you know, the diversity of kids that are there, but also the diversity of facts that are there. And at times, what I'm also hearing you all describe is the moment in which, as individuals, we also keep sort of placing on each other these set of stereotypes of what we expect people to do and be in school settings, right? So I have a doctoral student who's doing research work of women of color who are teachers, and in particular noting that there is a pattern of where men are seen as a disciplinarian, women of color are being placed into the mammy roles, right? In terms of the caretakers of the kids, of being called sort of the aunties or the moms of the kids, right? And not to say that there is anything wrong with that, but that being the boundaries of how sort of they're being positioned, which I think is fascinating in terms of how they end up experiencing our field, right? So you've all shared sort of these sort of experiences that I'm sure you, and it's, Roseanne kind of said, it's like you have these dual identities of like, I love being in this field, but I got to deal with this stuff, and I'm going to stay in it because the kids need me, and I want to be here. And I wonder, what are some of your thoughts around, if you think about the pipeline, the journey that you're on, that you've been on in terms of has brought you into the field, that's keeping you in the field. What are some of the touch points of the pipeline that you would say or offer up as ideas in terms of, if at this particular juncture of the pipeline would really be beneficial to have X, Y, and Z, right? Or I know, Jake mentioned around this networking piece, like what are some pieces that you see as sort of valuable at different junctures of the pipeline that would help to kind of help you sort of continue to flourish within the field?
I'll share first on this one, and this comes from my experience professionally working in the alternate route. One of the things we've come across through some of our research and then also anecdotally is that there are a lot of people working in schools that are eligible or certified to be teachers, but are working in paraprofessional roles. And so I think that there is an untapped potential. And I think there's lots of conversations, right? Like, why are they in those paraprofessional roles? But we could talk about that another time or later. But I think if there was a more intentionality around how we're recruiting staff, and then also once we find these great people we want to work for us, where are we placing them and investing in them? And just another note about what we found with teachers of color that are in the field, especially through the alternate route, it's the teachers of color that are most likely to be working with expired licenses or uncompleted licenses. So maybe a district went through a lot of work to hire them and get them, but now that they're there, they're not making sure that they're finishing their degree or their license. And that'll negatively impact that teacher in the long run and their ability to stay in that pipeline and hopefully, develop future teachers that are sitting in their classrooms.
I definitely think that this, based on my experience being a mentor and having a mentor teacher, that I think that one of the main things that people don't really focus on is being more selective about picking mentors. I think that sometimes it's kind of like an email. I've seen that happen, where it's just kind of like an email, like, who wants to mentor a student or a teacher, a student teacher. And if the teacher, him or herself, is not invested in growing the teaching profession or growing themselves as an individual, and then you place someone in their classroom who's supposed to be learning from them, they're going to learn those bad habits and all the things that come with that. And they're going to have the same ideology as that teacher, and they're going to adapt that even as a first year teacher. And you're like, you haven't even taught yet, where are you coming with all of this from? And it's from their experience in the classroom. So I definitely think that when we are picking out mentors, we definitely have to be more selective and have a conversation with teachers about their teaching philosophy, and whether or not they're invested in kind of growing the teacher profession.
Ooh, that's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, my big thing, in terms of, I guess, what I could recommend as like a recruitment force or bringing on teachers in the pipeline is, this whole reason we're having this discussion is to increase diversity. That's great. That's very important. But I think the term diversifying kind of puts this stigma that it kind of creates it into an affirmative action type of deal, where diversity it's really important, that we need to have representations of people of all walks of life, but it goes farther than just diversifying. It needs to go from really diversifying to normalizing. Because, when we keep saying, oh, we need to diversify, we need to increase this and that, it's important to recognize there's, statistics, but it also kind of shies away from the fact that it feels like, we're trying to build upon a number instead of just trying to normalize that, you know, people of color, people begin all walks of life can participate in these kinds of things and be these people, excuse me, of authority in these positions of, you know, education.
Thank you. Go ahead, George.
And I would say that I like the mentioning about mentorship, because I think mentorship is definitely key. And I think you know, if there's some way to foster a type of community, I know there's a lot of business owners that there's I think it's B2B meetings, or there's a market area where business leaders, they just meet up and there's like chapter groups. And if there's some way to work off community for people to be able to connect with people who are going through similar feelings, not just at their level, you know, at the same level in the pipeline, or, you know, people who are outside, also bringing in some content. But I think developing community, because you'll stay into, I feel you'll be more, or you'll gather more retention if there is a sense of community. If you could have a group of people build a community among themselves where they are accountable to each other, you know, and because we kind of see the negative aspects of that. And, you know, we talk about the teacher's lounge or teacher's room where, you know, never go in the teacher's lounge, never go in the teacher's room, all the negativity. If there's some way to build a positive community and have people gravitate to that versus any negative community, I think that could definitely be an influence to keeping people in the field.
That's great. You know, I really appreciate how you all brought up, you know, Charlene's point around paraprofessionals, right? So there's folks who got the skills, got the background, right? Who are sitting right there in these roles that we have placed them in, right? That could be, you know, it's an untapped treasure trove of folks. I think another place where we also see that is our out of school time programs, right? Our after school programs, where it's fascinating enough, you know, there is a tremendous diversity that lives in out of school time programs, where there's not only sort of individuals who either have some background around education or are interested and poised to want more, right? How do we also sort of look at them as sort of individuals that we can draw in? Because there's one of the pieces that I appreciate you all, you know, Charlene, you mentioning that, is because there's this notion, and I think Tanisha tried to hint at, as like, well, you know, there isn't the population there, there isn't the interest there. You know, no, there is. It's just that there's ways in which we sort of have organized a pipeline that minimizes who can get in, right? Who has those points of access. Also, I think there was something that was mentioned around sort of how we do hiring, how we think about the hiring, right? Because what I hear you all also describing is that you get to be teachers, you've been teachers, you're moving into the field to be teachers, right? But there's also got to be a organizational health that also exists within the schools that helps you stay in there, because you're also living a life of not just a teacher and that teacher lifestyle, but also a person of color in an organizational environment that, and I think it was Charlene that said, where you may be entering a space where for some practitioners, you are the first one who they are seeing, not just of that, but even in like Roseanne, who is a science teacher, right? You know, and seeing a Black female in this role of a tenured science teacher. And then lastly, this point around mentorship, right? That, and I love the point that was made around, not only do we need to have it, but we need to be uber intentional around who gets to be mentors, because not everybody has the wherewithal to know how to mentor, right? And to really develop sort of and nurture sort of our next generation of people that need to be in our field. So the last question I want to pose for folks before we kind of open it up for some chat conversations, or look at the chat and sort of pose some questions, is what I also hear you all describing is that there's stuff that's happening to your kids in your school, right? And as we think about, and some of you even sort of shared your own sort of personal stories, whether it's in college or K-12, that I think reflects some of the, you know, Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot calls it, when her book, Essential Conversations with Parents, where she talks about the idea of ghosts in the classroom, right? That we all carry the ghosts in our classroom experiences into how we walk into school, right? And I appreciate you all kind of sharing your own ghosts from your classroom experiences, right? And I'm wondering, you know, because you're right now, the kids that you all are working with, right, that you have been working with, is that they're having some of these ghost experiences right now, right? And what would you suggest are some of the things that we need to work on so that we are changing the narrative of those ghosts for our current kids who are in our K-12 space? I would even say lend even into our college environment spaces, right? What are some of the ghosts that we need to change? Because that's also part of the pipeline, right?
So I'm not sure if this directly addresses your question, but one of the things that stood out to me and connects to what you asked was, I think sometimes you forget that students are emotional beings and that they're people too, right? They're learning how to develop skills. Like George said, if they had a fight during the lunchroom, that's a real experience for them. And that's some real emotions they're learning to deal with. So if we could keep that in mind when we interact with our students. I read somewhere recently as part of my schoolwork about how learning is an emotional experience for students. Sometimes those emotions are happy. I'm so happy I got this. Sometimes it's frustration, like, why aren't I getting this? And sometimes it's scary. At home, I learned it this way, but now my teacher's telling me this. And we have to respond to students, keeping in mind that they're emotions, right? And I know most of us, I'm probably preaching to the choir about this in terms of like looking at the cause and not the behavior, but what is the student trying to tell you? And that really stood out to me, that idea that learning is emotional. I think for a lot of my life, the learning was joy. And so that's how I come into the classroom and coming to my job. I love learning, but learning to see over time that that's not the experience that all students have. So I have to learn how to respond to students better. I can't just force my level of learning on people. If one of my students is angry, I have to sit with that for a second and acknowledge that I can't be the one to make them happy, or maybe school isn't their happy place right now. But just keeping in mind that learning is an emotional process, and they're learning to be people, just like we did at some point.
I definitely think that okay, so in my preparation program, we were pushed to be reflective a lot about our experiences, our cultural lens, and that influence in the classroom. I think that's something that is constantly, it stays with me outside of the classroom, and constantly looking at my lens and understanding how that has an effect on how I interact with my students, and adjusting that based on my students, and being differentiating that, if we want to use that term. My parents are from the Caribbean, so I have a very kind of like, education is kind of like, there's no excuses. You just have to do well. They don't know how you're going to get that A. They don't know what you have to do, but you have to get it. That's basically what it is. And, you have the books, you have the opportunity, so do it. And understanding that that is not always the case for all of our students, and that our students, and I don't even think any of our students is probably not the case for most of them. And understanding that I have to put myself in their shoes, sometimes specifically with science, because there's like kind of like a gap between, and that goes into like a whole nother thing, but their understanding of the world and this whole culture of science. And so I kind of look at myself as kind of like a, cultural border crosser. Okay. So you have all these experiences in life, and we're going to value that. And then we're going to use science to have you expand on that. Okay. It's not that your experiences are invalid, and I'm coming here with the science, and this is what you gotta know. This is what's right, which I think sometimes turns students off. So valuing their experiences, who they are, their identities, and letting them know that there is a partnership in their learning experience. I feel like that's not always conveyed, that, it's always kind of like, you're the teacher, you have the knowledge, all the answers, it's okay to say you don't know as a teacher. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know, can you research that for me? That's so interesting. And they're like, well, you're the teacher. I'm like, yes, and I'm a human too, And so I tell them like it's a conversation, and I feel that that boosts their confidence. I feel like that they're more likely to tell me if they don't understand something, because I tell them when I don't understand something or if I don't know something. And so they're more comfortable in doing that. And so I'm kind of like, I'm kind of expressing and mimicking to them how to be a lifelong learner. And that's what my goal is like, you're not going to know all the answers, but you have to figure out how to get those answers. And so that's what my focus in teaching is how to get those answers, how to read for understanding, how to do all those things. And we're just using science as that method of doing that. Okay, so the basic skills. And so that negotiation with the education, that's I think that's missing.
Thank you. That was great. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and what everyone touched upon before, definitely, being open-minded to the students' emotion, especially, we don't always know what a student is thinking, and they're not always the easiest or quickest with telling you how they feel, but being open to seeing or using, whether it's body language, or it's hard to do that in terms of education now, but trying to reach out to students and understand them. And I had an experience with a student 2 days ago. And the student, I could tell that they were a little distracted, because if I have 2 monitors, so I'm not looking directly at the camera, I'm looking inside, looking at the bigger picture. But then you could tell with a student, if their camera or computer's here, but you see them look off on the side and start to laugh, right? That they're not so much laughing at what you're doing. I'm not that funny teaching wise. And then I asked the student, how are you, Thomas? And he just jumps back, looks at me in the camera and says, oh, I'm adding a phrase to my story. I said, okay, that's good, but how are you, Thomas? And it took him a second, because I guess no one has asked him, how are you? How's your day going? What's going on in your day? Is there any issues, any trouble, right? And I think just being able to check in with students, one of my friends from my previous job, who we still connect because we built that community together, she was telling us how proud she was of her students, of her 12-year-old males, because a lot of the males in her, or there was one male in her class that identified as a feminist. So, and he's 12 years old, and I think at 12, right, I was nowhere, I don't think I was anywhere at that level. I was focused on video games or whatever, cartoons, right? But for this young man just to be so, to use the terminology of today, so woke, right? I think we need to be in a mindset where we can understand students, because they're still developing and they're bringing their ideas together still. He's a feminist, but how far is a feminist, or how involved is he into feminism? Does he know any great leaders, information? Is he seeking? Is he looking to learn more? Is he learning to be a womanist? So there's feminism, and there's feminist and there's womanist. So I think being able to also be there for students in case they're trying to learn, and being open to the fact that students will sometimes want to teach you. They want to share their experiences, and that was touched upon earlier. I think just being able to say, yes, schoolwork is here, right? But there's also this part of you that maybe is outside of schoolwork, the part of you that is this person that's growing, developing. While we're doing schoolwork, maybe I can introduce some projects that will allow you to express yourself, express your identity, right? And for me to also be able to reach a point where I can learn more about you, because I think students, that's the most important subject in school for them, is themselves, right? They want to share as much of them as they can, even though it may take some time for you to get that information out of them. There's some students where it'll take a little longer, but then once you start to get that well going, it's going to overflow, and they're going to be able to express any amount of what their day is with you, and you'll get to a point where you need to say, okay, I understand, but let's get back to the classwork, and then you can share with me a little more later. So I think being able to be that person to help that student kind of bring their inner self out, I think that's something we can also try to focus on too.
So, I'm not an educator yet, big word, keyword yet. So I can't really speak on it from that perspective, but from someone who's still in a teacher preparation program, I can kind of relate to something I just recently learned about in a child and adolescent development class. So the concept of, I think it's Vygotsky's sociocultural development. basically what that says is your environment heavily dictates how you develop cognitively. And I think that's very true. You know, your surroundings and your environment dictate how you act as a human being. You know, how you perceive your culture, how you perceive thought, how you even form your thoughts. And from a student perspective, you know, you get these social and cultural tools, such as, you know, understanding and being able to process things through people who are technically masters of your culture, and those are teachers. You know, people that teach you and deliver information to you. So I think it's really important to understand from a teacher, well, for teachers and educators to understand that from a student's perspective, that they look up to you for everything. They look up to you to learn things. They look up to you how to react when you get in trouble. Because, you know, I remember when I was a kid and they would say, Jake Brown, go to the office. First thing I would do, and it was very rare I went to the office, but if I had to, first thing I would go is sit down and go, okay, why am I in trouble? What did I do? And that was kind of like my cry for help, saying like, okay, what did I do? How can I fix this? And again, it's just important for educators, and I keep this in mind as I go through my education program, preparation program, that when I become an educator, I'm going to be delivering these cultural and social tools for students and the youth to use as they go through life.
Thank you. So we've got some great questions in the chat, and so I'm organize them in such a way that I'm going to ask them as, you know, semi-hard and then gets real hard. Okay. So because I think they're in the sense of, not that they're hard questions, but they're multi-layered in terms of what you have to think about. And I want to sort of be cognizant of giving you all the permission to see things differently, you know, and there's no right or wrong answers around any of this stuff, because this is a very set of complex issue. So I'm going to start first with this one question here that was posed. How much do the current staff demographics of a school district weigh in on your decision to apply to that district? And if the district is not very diverse, what are the factors you would find compelling to help you decide to accept a position or begin employment in that district? Right. So what's the stuff that you think about, right? And I'm glad that this question is being posed, because as I can see, I'm seeing a lot of colleagues here, principals and assistant superintendents and superintendents that I know I have talked to about this stuff, who are thinking about some of this stuff in terms of like, well, wait a second, how do I bring a diverse staff when, you know, what are the things that they're looking at? What are the telltale signs that they look for to know, like, I think that's a place I could work?
I'll start. When I read this question in the chat, I smiled to myself, because my first priority was just finding anyone that could hire me. I was actually a late hire. My first year teaching, I got hired late in the summer. And I was like, why isn't anyone hiring me? So that made me smile to myself. But I also think that speaks to what our priorities are and where you are in your profession. Because at that point, when I was first getting started, that wasn't even on my radar. And I also think, as a person of color, how I experience the world, that wasn't a priority to me, and wow, I can't say that word, to me, in the sense that I'm used to navigating spaces where I'm alone anyway. So I wasn't even thinking like I can only go where there's these kind of people like me, which is probably a negative. My assumption was there's not going to be anyone like me, so let's pick a school that will hire me. So that's truthfully how I was thinking about that. And now, as I consult with people that are looking to get into the teaching field through alternate route, their priority is people that will accept their teaching licenses. And so I think that's also a factor as well, like who has an alignment with what the content that you want to teach. Again, knowing that your identity is something that you have always had and have always had to navigate through, unfortunately. But on the flip side, if people presented it positively in the forefront, I'm sure that would have made me feel better going into the situation than automatically assuming I was going to be independent.
Well, for me, I teach in Newark, but I teach at a school that it's not predominantly African-American. It's predominantly, I want to say, Hispanic, Portuguese, and Brazilian. So the students don't necessarily look like me, but there's two reasons why I decided to be there. One, it's because of the few students who do. I want to represent for those students. And then the students who don't, I want to be representative of what it means to be a Black woman in the United States. And that might be something heavy for people to kind of digest, but I know that, you know, social media, television has a view of what that means. And I definitely do not coincide with that teaching science at, you know, this high school. And so, and I've seen that it has had a positive impact on my students' views. And, you know, they're more comfortable asking questions that might seem inappropriate, but they're really just inquisitive about the world and not knowing how to pose a question in a way that seems, I guess, socially correct. And I embrace it because I want them to be open to doing that. And so for administrators who are trying to have teachers or diverse teachers in a school, I would say if I was just a teacher coming out, I would go to a school that I felt had a good community and support for me. That would be like the number one factor. Like there's a good community of teachers, I have support, I'm not gonna be overwhelmed because the first year of teaching can be overwhelming and very scary. And if I had an administration that could ensure that to me to some extent, I think that would kind of, that would kind of like win me over, that the support in the community.
All right, that's good. I don't know if any others want to chime in on this.
I'll jump in.
Go ahead, you can go first.
Oh, sorry, Jake. Well, I was just going to say, with my current, I recently was hired. I was hired in between July and August to the new position I'm at in Garfield as a computer teacher. And the staff, the administrative staff that hired me, there was no one of color there, and I'm usually in a few positions. I have only been one or part of the few of people of color to be applied or to apply to a position. But then if you go onto the school's website, you do see that there are students of color present in the building, and that's one of the factors for me. Is there any student that may or that might need someone like me to identify with? And I try to identify students on different levels. A lot of students that I teach, fortunately for me, you know, they like anime, and they may not be a student of color, but they like anime. So we connect on different animes that we may like, or anything that's pop culture wise. You know, I try to connect with students, and my knowledge of pop culture and just regular general knowledge really, I think, does help me connect with students. But as for applying to the district, you know, I look at the position, and you know, I just throw my hat in the ring and see if I can interview. And fortunately for me, the job that was available to me, they said they'll call me in a week, and they ended up calling me the same day of my interview, and gave me the job on the spot. And I think they saw me potential to go into this district and to make change. And that's why I think I hope to do with all my positions. I try to go in there and make change and be, you know, break stereotypes too. I'm not intentionally going in to break stereotypes, but I think I go into the school system, and people who don't look like me are there. You know, they get a different perspective that they might have, or give their perspective of me, or speaking to me, socializing with me, interacting with me, than they might have perceived before. And I have had experience like that with certain people, where I hear from another person, oh, they don't like people of a certain demographic, but they think you're cool. And you know, there people are saying it to me like, you know, that's an achievement. Like I should pat myself on the back, and I'm like, no, that's not a reward. But you know, hopefully they can move beyond that point of or that person that I interact with, they move beyond that point of where they thought about people of a certain demographic, and they actually realize we're all human, we're all people, right? Just situations separate us.
Jake, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, so I didn't really know how to answer this question, seeing that so in the preparation part of it, but you know, kind of like how Charlene was saying, it's at this point, it's whoever would hire me, right? But what I really wanted to say is, for if there are any other people in my position in this call, I'm not too sure who's all here. now I have a lot more to consider after hearing everyone else speak that has been through the process. It's very, I guess now I can kind of put that under my belt to say, okay, it's important to look at the demographic of the school and look at how things are run. And after hearing that, I guess, especially since I'm in physical health and physical education major, I would mostly have to consider, like, how is my program going to be run and how does that look like, and things of that nature. But I guess the whole point of this meeting is very important to consider, like, the demographic of the school as well and things of that nature. Again, not really too sure how to answer that one. That one kind of stumped me.
Mhm. That's okay, Jake. Actually, what's happened is you got some informal mentorship right here. Okay, so which is beautiful.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I also see somebody else mentioned in the chat, and that there's also habits within hiring that may include some patterns of nepotism and what have you, which exists in a lot of different fields, and the concern around that in particular is what stirs that nepotism to keep going. Meaning, there's a colleague who does work around, looking at the hiring in terms of how affinity bias plays a role in the hiring process. Meaning, how is it that the manner in which we are constantly having an affinity to people that are like us, also coloring the manner of who we look for, what catches our attention, what are the resumes that we pick up and say, oh, this person went to Rowan, okay, yeah, I'm gonna look at that more. Oh, this person went to so-and-so university, right? And we know, I see a lot of head nods of people like, that's what I do, right? But also being mindful of managing that affinity bias so it doesn't prevent you from being able to see sort of a diverse slate of candidates. And then the other dynamic that we could also consider is the types of questions that we ask our candidates, not just our candidates of color, but I would also sort of push us to think about our white candidates or all of our candidates and asking them the questions around things like, so tell me, how do you define equity? And what are the ways in which you see yourself being able to embody that equity lens within your class, right? And because that is part of the training that I know that they're getting in their teacher prep programs. So let's ask those questions within the confines of our educational spaces, because that is a tool that they're getting trained on. So let's ask them, what have they gained, and how can they move it forward within your particular school and district? I'm going to ask two more questions from our list here, and I see a question here. If you could give administrators one piece of advice as it relates to not just hiring, but keeping BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, another acronym that I'm starting to learn, everybody's using it, I'm like, oh Lord, is in their teaching roles at their schools, what would it be? Like, what's the advice you would give administrators beyond hiring to help keep that retention piece that's in that pipeline, right? Around sort of keeping folks in this profession.
Well, I think that,
go ahead.
You go ahead, Jake.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I kind of already touched on that, but I think just really trying to hone in on that normalization type deal, and that, because I feel like I can't really speak on it again too much because I haven't gone through a hiring process at all, but from things I've heard through the grapevine is that make people feel like people. We're diversifying, and we're trying to increase the number of people of color, but we're not just here to be on the brochure. We're not here to be the token. We're applying for a position because we feel we're qualified. And it's I guess you could say, for lack of better terms, an added bonus to be a person of color in this position. But still, I'm here for a reason. I'm applying to this position. This position for a reason. And you guys just get the added bonus that I'm a person of color, but at the same time recognize that I still am a person, and don't just make it all about the fact that the color of my skin increases, the demographic on the website.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jake. I laughed because I was the one that was put on, that's my first school district. I was on the brochure. This is the mid 90s. So we had brochures, right? There was no website. So I laughed at it, so it hurt. Roseanne.
I think that it's very important for, there's a couple of things, but I think that to keep our BIPOCs in their teaching roles, I think that they have to feel valued and heard and seen. I think sometimes even, at certain schools, and this is not just at my school, I have a lot of friends who are in different districts, that they sometimes feel overlooked, that someone doesn't even consider them for certain things. Like maybe a tutoring, oh, we need tutors. Like they might not even ask a teacher of color or, and I think of just being, having them just being considered, okay? And just asking, are you interested in this? And not just bypassing them, because sometimes people are on autopilot. And I feel that specifically, I know I have friends who Hispanic and African-American teachers who feel that they can't even say that they're interested because they have another teacher that automatically is going to get, say, said position, or because that's the teacher that is closest to this principal, and nepotism does play a role. And so they just don't even offer anymore because they're always kind of like second in line, because they don't jump as quickly at saying something. They probably wait and then want to talk to the person, but then the person might interrupt a conversation to say, I'm interested. And so you have all of those other variables that have an influence. So I would say just being fair about it. I know one thing that our school has done, even for like, say, being like looking at the students when they're at prom or helping with prom, is that they'll send out a mass email to everyone and say, we are looking for 3 females and 3 males, or whatever it is, just to kind of try to make it fair, because the same people have been doing it over and over again.
That's some good golden nuggets there. Others.
I'll jump in. One of the things I wrote down based on a comment from Roseanne, it made me think about how when I was teaching, I would sometimes you struggle to learn how to do things quickly. And so your administrator would just say, hey, talk to Roseanne, she's really good at it. And sometimes there's not that facilitation of the conversation. So then you're putting the onus on the teacher to be a burden to another teacher. So if an administrator could either take the time to model that thing themselves, and if they have that skill set, or actually facilitate the conversation. So it's more of a community and not just like, knock, knock, knock. I know you're busy, but can you show me? Because I've been there where it really is not a comfortable position to be in, and unintentionally you're making that teacher feel not supported. Whereas on the other hand, you're recommending that other teacher because you know they're going to do an excellent job. But it's just how that connection is interpreted. And then the last bit I would share, and this is based off of comments from others as well, is what are you asking specific teachers to do and why, right? Are you asking the same teachers to always volunteer to be chaperones? Are you always assuming that your single unmarried teachers can stay after school? Because that would happen to me a lot. They would, oh, Charlene, you'll do the after school, right? Because you don't have a family. And there's a lot of assumptions about that as well. And that's why I got a dog, because I would honestly say, I have to walk my dog, I have to go now. Because they would always just assume I was available. And it's true I was unmarried and in a state away from my family, but you shouldn't make assumptions about other people's responsibilities and how much gas they have left in their tanks at the end of the day.
Ooh, that was a good one.
I definitely agree with all the points that were shared. Definitely. So I feel there's much for me to say with all the points that were added. But I would say only thing I would add is just, and it's been touched on, but make sure that teacher feels a part of the community. There is a point where being a new person in a school, and then also being a new person, a teacher of color, right? It could be harder to navigate a community or a staff that is, that's lacking diversity. So, always trying to be that person, that bridge to, other people, or, taking that mentorship role too. And, trying to take that teacher under your wing, and also making sure that they know they're not there just because the brochure is lacking seasoning, just want to add some spice to it, or if that person, can monitor this demographic of students. Just make sure this person is a part of the community, because that's what they're there for ultimately. They're not there to be added in a tally or to just solely monitor a demographic of students. That person is a part of your community. And it does feel like that sometimes, that being a person of color, right? In case there's an emergency or something, they just dust you off and bring you out, put you in the front and say, okay, work your magic, do this, do that. Okay, now go back in the closet where we keep you, and we'll call you next week. So, just making sure that they're an active part of the community and giving them those chances, or giving them the chances to be a part of the community. I think that would be useful, greatly appreciated by the staff.
Wow. Okay, you all have, there's more questions there in the chat. I'm not going to go because I want to be mindful of time. I really appreciate the not just the golden sort of thought that you all laid out. I mean, the piece around the dog excuse, like you see people are capturing that idea, like, oh, I'm going to use that one, right? Because there is something to be said around what you all are all saying, is that you're having this life as a teacher, and then you're also having this life as a person of color in this profession. You're having to manifest and operate on multiple levels. I want to thank you all for your honesty, your bravery, your vulnerability, and what you've shared in terms of your experiences, and how that kind of, I see such hopefulness of what we can actually gather and garner from sort of this set of information. And I hope that for the folks who are on here and participating and listening in, I hope it's just as fruitful for you all. For those who are administrators, I hope you all are sort of thinking about, like, okay, how does this stuff also resonate in regards to my staff that are in my buildings, right? How am I doing the caretaking that these brilliant folks have just laid out? So I want to thank you all for this. And if we could, folks can do some of your virtual claps for these folks, right? Whether it's like this, or doing actual claps, or the Zoom clap hands, you all know how we figured that we've learned too much technology over these last 7 months. I think I'm supposed to turn it over to Nora now.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Eddie. And thank you to all of our panelists. What an incredible conversation. And I just have to echo what Eddie said in terms of how illuminating, but also how hopeful you make me, and probably, hopefully, all of us about the future of education. And you are exactly the kinds of people that we need in this educator workforce. So thank you for being willing to share yourselves and your stories. It was great. So bravo. As we move forward, we have our last speaker for this year's conference. I will come back on momentarily after he finishes to share some logistics, but I want to introduce Dr. John Henning. He is the Dean of Monmouth School of Education and the NJACTE president. He's also an experienced educational practitioner, researcher, and leader. His primary research interests include practice-based teacher education, teacher development, instructional decision-making, and classroom discourse. These interests developed from more than 20 years of experience as a high school teacher. Henning is also an active scholar and researcher with more than 50 publications. His fourth book, titled Building Mentoring Capacity in Teacher Education, A Guide to Clinically Based Teacher Education, was recently released by Routledge. And so let's welcome Dr. Henning.
Thank you, Nora. That's very kind. And good afternoon to everyone. What an honor and a pleasure it is to be with you this afternoon with this opportunity to make a few closing remarks at this wonderful event. First, thanks to all of you today for coming and for staying to the very end so that you could hear absolutely every remark made on this topic. And a special thanks to all of you who made the time and made the effort to attend all 4 sessions. Your recognition of the importance of this work is deeply appreciated. Thank you for your commitment. And finally, I want to acknowledge a very, very special group of people, those who came to all 4 sessions, who have stayed to the very end and who still have their cameras on. So I couldn't resist that. We live in a very different world, don't we? That we did from 9 months ago. Before I make a few brief remarks of my own, I would be remiss if I didn't first acknowledge those whose generosity and hard work made this year's convening possible. I first want to thank Nora Highland, who gave a great introduction for me personally, and how smoothly she's opened and closed these sessions. Tristan Cox for his opening remarks. Dr. Fergus, it has been a pure pleasure to watch you work today. You just did a fantastic job of leading that discussion. Dr. Jennifer Robinson, the best panel facilitator that I know. And the panelists, I think Dr. Robinson was right at the very beginning of the session. Another grand slam by the panelists this year, like last year. Thanks to Jacob Brown, Charlene Lawd, Rosie-Ann Lesperance, and George Stevenson. As said just a few moments ago, is my same comment. I leave today knowing the profession is in good hands. What capable people, what insight into teaching that you have and into life in general. I also want to give a special thanks to the 3rd Annual Convening Planning Committee, Stacy Lefwitz, Chair, Nora Highland, Jennifer Robinson, Dorothy Fiola, Nancy Norris Bauer, Susan Stansfield, and our esteemed colleagues from New Jersey Department of Education, Tanisha Davis and Liz Fernandez-Vina. And a special thank you to Chanel Harris for corresponding with presenters and creating the weekly program flyers, as well as Corey Weber, who assisted with technical needs. And thanks to the sponsors, Rutgers University, under the leadership of Dean Wanda Blanchett, the New Jersey Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, and also NJDOE, Department of Education. You know, I am so proud that NJACTE is involved with this work. And I was so pleased to see Stacy Lefwitz and the convening committee carry it forward during these difficult times, because it didn't look so easy last spring. Due to our current environment, more thought and more planning was required for this conference. Ultimately, the final design that we all participated in was simple, easy to use, and best of all, it worked wonderfully well. It was a great example of how to hold an important and timely event in a virtual environment. Kudos to Stacy and the convening committee for their deep commitment to making the convening happen in the face of many challenges. Thanks also to the presenters throughout this conference for your work and your willingness to share. I attended 4 great sessions and I picked up a lot. It was heartening to see this work happening all over the state of New Jersey. It should be the work of every teacher educator everywhere. Demonstrated effectiveness in advancing the cause of social justice should be part of our resumes. We should be deeply engaged in the scholarship of anti-racism, and this work should be so woven into our actions and our awareness so that we are ever conscious, ever attentive to racial justice. This was the 3rd annual convening for Diversifying the Teacher Workforce. It is wonderful we have all had the opportunity to be part of this critically important event 3 times. The convening is a visible commitment by its sponsors and their members to the value of diversifying the teacher workforce. It is critically important that we continue to renew this commitment through this conference. There is still a tremendous amount of work to be done, and we all saw that today by the comments, Tanisha's comments, and the facts that she brought forward and where we're at, and certainly by the panelists' comments, both the quantitative and qualitative nature of the work that still needs to be done. And there's an old Chinese proverb that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. Each of us should be asking ourselves at the end of this conference, what can I do now to move this work forward? What opportunities are there for me to advance this work? What can I bring back to the convening next year? We are well beyond the time when racial tolerance is a sufficient goal, when doing no harm is enough to think highly of ourselves. Instead, passivity in the face of great need is unacceptable. It is unworthy of our calling to be educators. Instead, we have to be thinking of how we can actively work to lift each other up. More specifically, for educators, we need to be thinking about how we can lift up each other's children. Finally, we close the convening on the eve of what I believe is one of America's most important elections. In my opinion, the most crucial issue to be decided is whether or not we are deeply committed to lifting up every child and every person in our community. I believe that without that commitment, we cannot sustain a democracy. About 3 years ago, I read a book called The Death of Democracy. It was a very gloomy book that pointed out a number of disturbing trends in American politics. But after many pages of dire observations, it closed on a very positive note, and I would like to do the same. The authors claimed that there has been no precedent in the history of the world of a multiracial democracy. That, they said, is the great challenge that lies before us as a country. Indeed, we have been grappling with this challenge throughout the history of the United States. I believe we can do it. America has always been a country of firsts, and we can do this too, regardless of whatever the results of the election. America is much more than a place or a government or a collection of holidays. It also represents a collective commitment to a set of ideals, though often imperfectly realized, but which still represent great potential and hope for the future of this country. Those ideals are what bring us together. And in my opinion, those are the high stakes that we're working for when we strive to diversify the profession. It affects every aspect of our lives and our community and our country. And so I hope that you will forgive me for this somewhat dramatic expression of such personal beliefs. But I wanted to share with you what this work means to me. And I wanted to let all of you who have worked so hard to make this convening a reality and who have come and taken time to participate and share your work, that I am with you. Finally, thanks to all of you here now and who have been to the convening for supporting it, for continuing this work, and for your enduring commitment to the children and the future of this great country. And so thanks very much for listening. Have a great evening. And I'm going to pass it back to Nora, as she said at the beginning. Thank you.
John, thank you so much for those words.